So this is our AI tool slide. The department does not permit the use of generative AI tools. I think everyone's familiar with this now, so we ask that you do not attempt to use these tools. So our agenda, I spoke about this just a little, but we will have an overview. We'll talk about the key components of this, of IDEA high
He's so
cost,
good. Okay.
and also the state special school transportation. And we've just come to call that SSST. It's much easier. We will go over documentation,
SST.
and
Three S's and a T. What am I?
we
Oh,
have
I'm just gonna open
pulled
Word.
we have pulled what we're calling exemplars, but we just have some examples of some things that were submitted this past year that we want to share with you of the way things were done for successful submissions. Also, we'll go over a checklist for success for submissions. We want to talk about summary template. There's a little bit more here. This is again where we want to submit for some suggestions from you all. And then finally, we'll take any questions and have a closing. I am going to turn it over to Julia now, and she will go over the overview section. You're muted, Julia, if you're talking.
I was talking. Thank you. um, thanks, Jerry Beth, and good morning, everyone, again. Before we get into kind of the nitty gritty of high cost and the state special school transportation reimbursements, we know that those are pretty involved, like Jerry Beth mentioned previously. So we want to just kind of give a brief overview of both of those. I know a lot of you have probably been part of this process before, but for some of you who are new or just need a little refresher, hopefully this will be helpful. So we'll look at IDEA high cost first. So these funds are intended to support schools and support LEAs by providing additional resources that will ease the strain on budgets that may come from providing sometimes the more complex services that students with special needs might require so that they can receive a free appropriate public education or FAPE. So looking at that definition, thinking about if a student is a high need child, what does that look like when it comes time to do these reimbursement requests? A high need child with a disability receives special education, other related services that are identified in the IEP. That's really important to keep in mind and exceed the typical needs of a child with a disability. So depending on the extent of these services, this can create an additional financial impact on the LEA. These can be very costly. This is aligned with the federal definition, and that definition ensures that the cost of a high need child with a disability is greater than 3 times the average per pupil expenditure in Tennessee. I know that's a mouthful. And Jerry Beth mentioned earlier, we don't have those per pupil expenditures yet for this year, but they are coming. And it also takes into account the number and percentage of high need children with disabilities that are served by the LEA. So thinking about what's allowable when we're looking at how to determine a high cost student. I'm not going to go through all of these individually because I know that y'all can read the slides. But just a few of those, this kind of lets you see what would be allowable when you're trying to determine if a student meets high cost or not. So these might be things like one-on-one assistance, like the student needs a full-time EA or specialized equipment for that student. There's also a list of several others. I know special transportation is often one that we saw a lot last year when Jerry Beth and I started helping with this work, contracted services, things of that nature. And I saw in the chat, we will be sharing these slides, so y'all will have access to them. On the flip side of that, there are some expenses that would not be allowable for high cost. And that's things like prorated salaries for personnel who are already providing special education services or related services. And that could be, teachers, assistants, other related services personnel, things of that nature, and summer learning camp. I think that's something we have seen a little bit where there was some confusion about ESY versus summer learning camp. So summer learning camp is not considered ESY, so that would not be an allowable cost. And again, these are all going to be in our resources and the slides that'll be posted. So y'all don't have to, write these down or anything. They'll be available for you. So moving on to SSST, we know that LEAs are ultimately responsible for transporting students who are attending state special schools. And that would be like Tennessee School for the Blind, Tennessee School for the Deaf, West Tennessee School for the Deaf. But these LEAs may be eligible to receive a percentage of reimbursement for those services. And that's dependent on the availability of funds that are in the state set-aside discretionary pool for the school year. That would be the 25-26 school year that we're going to be looking at, excuse me, as well as the total amount that's approved for all LEAs for this request. So it's really important to remember that those amounts can vary from year to year. So LEAs may not be eligible for that same amount each year. Now, the list of allowable versus non-allowable expenditures for SSST is much more narrow than what we saw for high cost. This is essentially just confined to, transportation to and from the state special school during the school year or for ESY. And just as a reminder, that has to be in the IEP. So if a student is required to do the extended school year, that has to be listed in the IEP or they will not be able to be reimbursed for that. Outside of that, the allowability is pretty narrow. So this may be a special bus, the bus drivers who specifically take those students to these schools. Sometimes it's contracts with parents and things like that. So one thing to keep in mind is you may have a student who qualifies for high cost and qualifies for state special school transportation. But in that instance, you would use the high cost application. You cannot have a request. You cannot request high cost and state special school transportation reimbursement for the same student. So you would have to choose. And again, you should use the high cost application if that is the case. So we'll go over some key components of high cost and a state special school transportation. Excuse me. With high cost, we know that these are additional funds and that it's subject to the availability of federal funds. So these are distributed to LEAs based on special education expenditures from your GP funds only. Okay. These are not used to establish, to support, or to administer the program, and these remain under the control of the state until it is dispersed to an LEA for a specific high need child. So these are intended to assist your LEA in providing those services in high need children. So kind of like, I think of it like similar to supplement, not supplant. Like these are not taking the place of those funds. These are just intended to provide a little more assistance. So one of the things I mentioned earlier, and one of the things we'll probably say several times throughout this presentation, is that only costs that are identified in the IEP can be considered when you're determining whether that is a high need child. So if it is not in their IEP, then it cannot be claimed for reimbursement. So, for example, if a student has a bus aid, well, that has to be in the IEP. If it's not listed in their IEP, it cannot be claimed for a reimbursement from the LEA. To qualify for the high cost reimbursement, the GP expenditures, your general purpose expenditures, like I mentioned, have to be 3 times the state average per pupil expenditure for FY25. And like I said, these numbers are not available yet, but if you've done the high cost application before, you know that it is listed within the application itself. So you'll be able to see that and determine if your costs meet that threshold. And then again, the percentage is going to be determined based on the availability of funds in that state set aside pool for the school year and for the total amount approved by all the LEAs for this particular category. And then looking again at state special school transportation, these students are attending these schools because they have been placed by IEP team decisions. The LEA, we know, is responsible for transportation for that cost, and that can include buses, transportation by parents, and other associated costs of transportation that have been paid for by GP funds and not already paid for by some existing TDOE contract. These will affect the LEA's maintenance of effort. And so that's something else the LEAs need to consider before applying. You need to ensure that they have enough special education expenditures for the 25-26 school year without the application's expenditures amount. So just making sure to keep that in mind before you apply so that you're covering all your bases. I'm going to throw it back to Jerry Beth to talk a little bit about documentation and what that looks like.
Thank you, Julia. Again, we're going to say some of these things over and over again, but part of it is really important. And on the required documentation, we are starting with the student IEP because, as Julia mentioned, unless this is in the IEP, there obviously cannot be reimbursement. So for the student IEP, it must cover the entire fiscal year. For this FY26, it will be July 1, 25 through June 30th, 2026. So any of those dates in which these services occurred must be covered by an IEP. So for your uploads, we will only require the cover pages and the service pages to show what is required. You don't have to include the signature pages or anything else. We do need the student state ID to be listed on every page that is uploaded, just so we can ensure that we have the correct IEP that we are looking at. And also with the service part, it needs to be clearly listed within the IEP, such as the dates, the times of the sessions, and this is very important that it aligns with the uploaded summary template and supporting documentation that will go along as well. We do have something new to report for you all, and I hope you will be happy about this. It's no longer going to be a requirement that you have to redact PII from the IEP uploads. We're following the lead that results-based monitoring has taken because this information does go into each plan, and that is considered a secure site. So we've had a lot of requests. We've had people ask about this, so we are no longer going to require that redaction. Again, at the bottom of this slide, we do have an example from an IEP last year, specifying an assistant in the general education setting. You can see 7 hours a day, 35 hours a week. It has the beginning and ending dates. So that is the kind of thing that we do need to see in an IEP. Okay, the summary supporting document template. This is an Excel spreadsheet. It does have different kind of service tabs at the bottom. And so you will select the one that is most applicable to what you're applying for reimbursement. And there's an example for each one of those tabs. This is one of the things later on we're going to solicit feedback from you to know if you would like to see any changes in this, but we will cover that a bit more later. So you will have one student per template. The justification at the top of the page should be clear and specific rather than just noting that the service is in the IEP. And we have provided an example for this one at the bottom. And I will say this justification that we provided goes above and beyond. So don't think you have to get quite this specific, but this was a really good example. It definitely covers it. Also, please note the IEP start dates for services up in the right-hand upper corner of that example. Typically there are going to be 2 IEPs uploaded that covers the fiscal year, and sometimes there are even more if there are addendums along the way. So we need to see the IEP start dates for each one of those in this summary template. So when we talk about how you list things in the template, what we need to see here is that it matches your supporting documentation. So that means the invoices, the dates, the totals, etc. And of course, again, it needs to match the IEP dates. So you can see in the example we provided here, this was one for tuition for residential services. And in this case, the LEA was billed monthly. So in their upload, they would have a monthly invoice, they would have the date, and they would have the amount per month. And then all the other supporting documentation would follow along. So that, because that's how the supporting documentation is, that's how we need to see it in the template. There may, if you are only charged one time per year, then you will just list one, one line there. I will say that the expenses, the types of expenses vary greatly in the things that we see. So if you get to this part and you have questions, and we're going to say this a lot, feel free at any time to reach out to either Julia and I, and we can help you figure this out. This was one of the areas last year that a lot of submissions had to be returned due to the fact that the summary template did not match the supporting documentation. And when that happens, it's just really difficult to try to figure it all out and align it and just verify that the expenses are correct. So going to the supporting documentation. And again, there are so many varied kinds of things, the way services are billed, the way contracts are, the way different LEAs do their payment processes. It's really hard to narrow this section down because it could be so many things, but we'll talk about some of the basics. So if you have LEA personnel, we know we see a lot of one-to-one educational assistants. You're going to want to upload payroll documentation. Personally, I think one of the easiest things to do is to get a payroll report that shows checks that went out to personnel, and it will also include the costs per check for the benefits for that pay period. I also saw some signed statements from a payroll official from the LEA showing like a yearly total amount of salary and benefits. For any other types of expenses other than LEA personnel, we need to see the proof of obligation of funds. So when you obligate the funds, that means you're either signing a contract for services or you're issuing a purchase order. That is going to be, it's going to need to show your dates, your signatures, what the services are. We also will need to see invoicing. How are you invoiced? Is it, again, monthly? And then proof of payment. I'll talk a little more specifically about each one of these. So there, back to proof of obligation of funds. Most of the time, you're going to have contracts for services. We've seen a lot of those. That could be your private placement. That could be an individual providing services for the student, like if you've had to hire possibly a behavioral consultant that is above and beyond anyone who may already work for your LEA. You might have an agreement with another LEA. You might have an agreement with parents for transportation. And again, any of your contractual agreements need to include the services that are to be provided, the effective dates, the amounts, and include signatures, because those signatures are going to show us that, yes, that has been approved and you are thereby obligating to pay these funds. Invoicing, again, that could come several different ways. Typically, you see a monthly invoice, someone in your finance department or in your department will sign off, close pay, something showing that it has been authorized for payment. And then we need to see proof of payment. Was this actually paid? So this could be check stubs, or oftentimes I know there are finance reports that show the checks that have been written, the dates, the amounts, even the account line items from which the funds came. So on your documentation for expenses, again, all your documentation must follow the service dates on the IEP. Again, that's for your contracted services, wait a minute, I'm on the wrong one. Sorry about that. Get to the next slide, please, Julia. Thank you. So your required documentation, all of these documents should be uploaded as a single document per student. So for example, student 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you would upload one PDF containing all the necessary IEPs. You will upload one Excel template that is your summary, and then one PDF that contains all the supporting documentation. Typically, that is the largest upload. And we do still want to follow the same naming conventions for the files. You're going to put the student's initials, the state student ID, and then the year and either IEP, summary, or supporting doc. This is really important. I know some of you only have 1 or 2 students or even up to 5, but there are several LEAs who have many, many more students uploaded, and this is the only way we can keep up with the documentation per student. Okay, now we will we'll share just a few examples. And again, please know as we go through these, this isn't how it has to be for each kind of service. These are just examples of uploads that were done well last year. Hopefully we'll give you an idea of the things that need to be included. The first one is an example IEP for a one-to-one assistant. And you can see there in the services, you can see aid in general education setting. It's got the amount of time per week, the hours per week, your beginning and ending dates, And then down in your LRE and general education statement, there is a good explanation there of why a one-on-one is necessary for this student to be successful. Okay, so for the next page, this is continuing example documentation for a one-to-one assistant. Over to the left, I know that might be a little difficult to see, but that is a payroll report showing check amounts, showing amounts that were paid to that LEA personnel. And then on the right, we have the example that this was in one row. You can see that the totals match from the document on the left to the document on the right. You can also see there that is a really good justification that was provided in that summary template on this one as well. And we did note here that for this particular student, monthly timesheets were uploaded for the personnel as well. I'm not going to say that's a requirement, but if you wish to upload monthly timesheets, that can be uploaded as well. So then the next few slides kind of take us all the way through an example for a private placement and also parent transportation. You can see over on the left under your special education and related services from the IEP, you do have the hours per week, the beginning and ending dates, and you can see the location of the services is in a private residential setting. You go to the LRE section and you can see there that is further noted that services will be provided at a residential setting. And then under the special transportation there, that's a really good example. I'm actually going to read this one. Parent contract to reimburse for mileage when taking the student to school or picking them up for visits home, or if he moves to day placement for transporting to and from school each day. So that justification on special transportation really would cover all the bases. And again, note that it does have the beginning and ending dates there. So the next slide, this is the same student kind of following the documentation. That is one of the invoices. This is coming from King's Daughters. They billed monthly, and this is just 1 month invoice that we uploaded here. But you can see the monthly invoice. It's for the tuition, and it gives you the monthly price there. And then over to the right is a financial report showing that this check was written. And you can see the amounts match there. The next slide, and again, this is follow up that same student. There was a contractual agreement that was uploaded that the LEA had with the parents for this transportation. You can see that you've got the dates, you've got the amount that will be paid, and there were signatures from both the parent and LEA on this agreement. The next slide shows a mileage report that the parents did complete. It was signed and turned into the LEA for payment. I believe these were done monthly, and this is just 1 month example here. And so that's what they would turn in. And then to the right, you can see this is documentation showing a check number, check date, and amount, and that those amounts match as well. And then finally, this is a copy of the summary template. And you can see here that we highlighted these amounts that the previous slide showed the documentation for. So all of this was the supporting documentation was uploaded by month. It was listed on this account summary template by month, and it was really easy to track the amounts and match them up, make sure they align, and all the documentation was here to support the request for reimbursement on this. Next, I will hand it over to Julia. Let me say a couple of things about that documentation, though, before I hand it over to Julia. Um, I'm going to talk about contracts just for a second. I know that some LEAs may have a contract with say a day school, and they may send several students to a particular day school. You might have a contract with that school that covers all your students. Like there's a set tuition amount for the students. It may cover the entire school year. And again, you might have several different students covered under that contract. If that is the case, and again, we want you to reach out to us so we can make sure it's all done correctly. But I'm going to say that you could just upload one contract if it covers several students and say just put the student ID numbers that are included in the reimbursement request on that contract. So you don't necessarily have to upload that contract over and over again. And as we move forward, if you have special situations like that, we want to help you make these uploads as easy as possible because we know it's a lot. So when you have questions of things like that, like, can we do this? Again, just please, we want you to reach out to us. And we're also going to start having office hours as time gets a little closer to the opening of the instrument. But we do want you to ask those specific things. Now I'll turn it over to Julia for a checklist for success.
Thank you, Jerry Beth. All right, we're going to spend just a few minutes kind of going over some things that will hopefully help your requests be reviewed and processed and hopefully approved more quickly and accurately. And I mentioned already, I know we said this, but we are going to post these in TDOE resources. So you'll have access to all of this information when the time comes to submit your request. So you don't have to remember all this stuff or write all this stuff down. So Jerry Beth mentioned this earlier, but LEAs have to use the state student ID, so not a local student number, and those need to be listed at the top of each page, somewhere on each page. The top is usually preferable because we can see that very clearly and quickly, but they should be noted on each page of your uploaded documentation. One thing that Jerry Beth mentioned that was new is that this year you don't have to redact all that PII because we know ePlan is secure. So that hopefully will take a little bit off your plate when you're going through and uploading all these documents. And then we also talked about how for each student, separate files have to be uploaded. So one PDF with all of that student's IEPs that are required, one supporting document template for that student, and then one PDF for all their supporting documentation. So for example, if you have a student who has an IP and then they had a couple of amendments along the way, all of those would be uploaded as one PDF file. So you wouldn't upload 3 separate IEPs. You would upload that all as one specific PDF. And then these must cover the FY26 dates. So July 1st, 2025 through June 30th, 2026. Those have to be covered within the IEPs. So that may mean, amendments or addenda, things like that have to be included. We know that that is pretty common. So making sure that that entire FY26 year is covered. And as well as for the IEP, those service date ranges also have to fall within those dates, within the July 1st, 2025 to June 30th, 2026. If they are outside of those dates, they will not be eligible for reimbursement. If there's a gap in services, then the LEA will need to delete or redact those expenses from what they are submitting. So, for example, you can see here in this screenshot, there was a gap of 7 days in their student's IEP. So, the 7 days of service expenses had to be deleted from the invoice. And that should be shown on the invoices as well as the summary template. And so you can see here that they noted which days there were without an IEP, which school days, and then they noted that that amount was subtracted. So that's super helpful for us when we're reviewing to be able to see that very quickly and clearly. And Jerry Beth mentioned this as well, but the IEP start date, so this is going to be on that summary, on that spreadsheet. These should match the start dates for the uploaded IEP. So not necessarily, the first day of school. That may not be when that IEP started. They should align with what is listed on the IEP. So you can see here, this student had 2 IEPs uploaded. So both of those dates are listed for their start dates for services. And Jerry Beth kind of talked a little bit about this. This is along those same lines, but you may have multiple students who get the same service. So, for example, you've got 3 kids that are all riding the same bus to TSD, or you have 5 students who are going to Rutherford Academy, and they're all attending, at the same time. And you may have multiple, or you may have, that documentation for those expenses might be one big sheet with all of them listed. But those costs need to be divided on the summary, on the spreadsheet, so that we can see clearly. And like highlighting them is very helpful for us because we can see that very quickly. So you can see here, for example, these students were contracted with Genesis Learning Center. There were multiple students here, but they highlighted for that specific student what the cost was so that we could see that easily. So that's very helpful when those costs have to be divided up. And then making sure that the amounts match across all the locations for this student. So within the instrument, you have the first page where some information is pre-populated, the per pupil expenditures and all that stuff is listed. You will enter the total student expenditure there. That should and we share here, this is just a portion of supporting documentation. Is very obviously not all of it, but you can see that those amounts line up across all 3 sections. And one thing to notice is on that summary, on the spreadsheet, the amount at the top should turn green if the amount is correct and those are all aligned. So you should be able to see that as well when you're filling that out. I'm going to give it back to Jerry Beth one more time, and we're going to ask some questions of y'all.
Okay. I would say this is the scary part, but no, we really would like some suggestions for improvement on this process. I will say, there are some things obviously we can't change. But we would like to know any suggestions that you have for improving this process. Again, if the ideas for changes still meet all the requirements that we have to have, please feel free. We have the QR code. There's a link there as well. It's a very simple survey. But if you do have ideas for improving this process, anything we can do to help you, we would like to know very much. Are GP funds the only funds that can be reimbursed? What if I use GP funds are the only ones that can be reimbursed. I will say that. I just saw that question pop up. Um, but we would very much encourage you to make any suggestions here. And I'll let Julia leave that slide up for just a second. And I will just say again, last year when we started helping with this process, I know there were many, many, many submissions that had to be returned to LEAs for corrections, revisions. Several went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Our goal really, really moving into this year is to help you all at the front end of this process to get everything as correct as possible before you submit. And therefore, that's going to make the reviews and everything go quicker. I will say as well, I don't think we had it in our slides anywhere, but we are working with ePlan with the operations team already to get this instrument ready. There will not be changes really to the instrument. We didn't really see any issues with that last year. I think we reordered the documentation, the related documents to be IEP first, supporting documentation second, and then summary template third. We just feel like that has a better flow for what you're doing and how you should check all your totals. But otherwise, there aren't really going to be any big changes to the instrument. We're only waiting on the new census information as well as the per pupil expenditure amount. But we are planning to open that on June 3rd. That doesn't mean you have to jump on it June 3rd. We know a lot of you really need to wait until the end of the fiscal year to be able to do stuff. But anyone that wants to be working on it, it will open June 3rd. And again, we will make ourselves available to assist you in any way during that. The instrument will close. Julia, I'm drawing a blank. Is it September 1st?
I am not 100% sure. I'll have to go back and look at my notes.
I believe we're setting the closing date September 1st.
I'll double check and put it in the chat.
Which is a little later than the closing date last year, but we feel like hopefully working with y'all more on the front end that the review process isn't going to take as much time and we will be able to get things approved quicker. So I'm pretty sure it's September 1st and it's a little longer time. Okay, Julia, you can go to the next slide. And at this time, I'll open it up to any questions that anyone may have. Again, if you have